Greg. I'm a Linux kernel developer, a maintainer, part of the Linux kernel security team. I'm also responsible for all the CVEs that are issued with Linux kernel. And somebody recently pointed out that I have seen every kernel security bug in the past 20 years, which means I've been doing this for a long time. Note, this is all just my personal opinion. I can't give you legal advice. I can't give you regulatory advice. But I am part of the CRA. I'm an EU resident. I'm part of the CRA working expert group to try and come up with some white papers and help evolve the CRA into something that's useful and makes sense and how we can all use it. The CRA has been officially ratified. It's going to take a number of years to roll out, and that number of guidance and stuff that's happening, I'll talk about as I go on. There's a whole bunch of TLAs with the CRA. CRA, again, Cyber Resilience Act. PDE, that's the most important one. That just means something with software in it. So that means software on its own or something with software in it, like a device. Financial, you guys are just putting software on the market. Putting something on the market means you're making it available for download anywhere in the world, within the EU. So no matter if you don't deal with the EU, you still have to deal with its rules. That's just the way the world works. Sorry. Software bill of materials, and then open source. Anyway. CRA specifically, and all these slides will be available later. I got a whole bunch of links as well. It's just for the EU to put stuff dealing with the EU market, but it imposes some obligations on you as a manufacturer, as a company, and as an individual, as a maintainer and a developer for open source software, because we are dealing in the public. There's a whole bunch of specific rules about product classification, about what type of device is what type of device. I wouldn't really worry too much about that. Those things are under flux right now, and there's going to be a whole bunch of more publications on how to define these rules of what product is what. And then market surveillance and enforcement. That just means there are going to be some government regulatory agencies watching this and enforcing this. Watching this in that it is a self-reported regulation like CE mark and UL marks, but it's enforced by the government as well. Self-enforcement and market enforcement. The market enforcement is going to be two major groups. There's going to be the CIRT, anyway. These people are out there now. There's a whole bunch of them in the different countries. Some countries in the EU have more than others. It doesn't seem to match the size of the country. Famously, Germany has one, while the Netherlands, where I live, has 3. Doesn't seem to make too much sense, but they are there. And then the ENISA is the overall version. Think of ENISA as the US version of MITRE, the European Union for Cybersecurity. ENISA works very tightly with MITRE and back and forth, but this is the agency that deals with all cybersecurity issues. The big thing about the CRA is, and I think this is a good thing, it's going to try to give a bunch of requirements for how software is developed in a secure way. A number of us have been talking about this for years and years and years. We need to do better with software development. We need to do better with software support. Support is harder than development. People don't realize that at times. And we deal with vulnerability reporting and handling vulnerabilities. Because software, it can be vulnerable. It is vulnerable. We're human. So we need to handle that type of stuff. There's going to be a bunch of software lifecycle requirements that are going to come out. Risk management, design, development, documentation, production. I wouldn't worry too much about this. These specifications are going to be rolling out over time. They seem pretty sane. They're nothing any of us shouldn't be doing anyway in the first place. Not a big deal. There's going to be different types of products. Products are different classified, so depending on what product you are in, is going to be determined what the rules apply to you. Now, us creating software, open source stuff, we cannot dictate use. So we don't know how our software is going to be used, so our software can be in any one of those products. In fact, our software is in every one of those products. So don't worry too much about the different types. If you're a manufacturer of a physical device, you need to worry about the types. Us software engineers, programmers don't need to worry too much about that. Stuff that's outside the scope, websites don't worry about, software as a service don't worry about. Automotive, medical, aeronautical, marine, those are already covered under other regulations in the EU. You already have enough things to worry about. You don't have to worry about the CRA. CRA, if you're following those other regulations, CRA is not going to be an issue at all. And non-commercial hobby products. That's a very vague area. There's a bunch of wording trying to define that very well. It turns out that's not going to be very real, because all our software will be used in a commercial way anyway, which is fine. So open source software, if you have a closed source hobby project, then don't worry about the CRA. If you have an open source software project, it will be under the CRA. Here's the more classification of different groups. Developers, stewards. Stewards, I'll talk a lot about stewards. Stewards is a new classification that they came up with to say, we are a maintainer, we are a steward is someone who's responsible for bundling the software together and doing a release. Could be a team of people, could be an individual person, could be a company. It is a legal person, and a legal person, as you know, can be a company, can be a group of people, can be an individual. They use the term legal person a lot, not natural person, which is an individual. Legal person is very well known in law, so a steward is somebody who is a legal person who puts software on the market. And there's some rules that are going to have to be abided by that. I am a legal person for the Linux kernel. Linus Torvalds is as well. We both do releases. You, as a software engineer who does a bundling of a project and hits the release button, you are then the legal person responsible. You are a steward. And then there's manufacturers, integrators, and distributors. So again, those are companies. I'm not going to talk about that. If you have a company, you work for a company, your lawyers should know all about the CRA, and you can handle this on your own. But here's a handy flowchart that the EU came up with. They posted this and gave a talk about this at FOSDEM. Again, you can walk your way through it to see if you're actually going to be in scope or not. The EU worked very closely with the open source community. They wanted both open source to be covered, but yet not too restrictive in how it's handled, because they know open source runs the world. They know open source also is very important, but they want to make sure it can at least be secure and handled properly. So you guys can follow the rules, or follow the flowchart. It's very simple like that. So the big thing is, manufacturer, your company, talk to your lawyers. Open source steward, talk to me. Linux Foundation is going to be publishing some more documentation about this. Eclipse Foundation's worked with some other groups, and they're publishing a lot of information about this. But basically, if you're a steward, you're responsible for two different things. This is it. This is all you have to do. Provide a contact if somebody finds a security bug, and report security fixes to somewhere. That somewhere is still being determined, whether it's a NISA, whether it's a CVE, whether it's another entity. That's it. You should be doing this today. If you're not doing this today for your open source project is way, way behind. There's a whole bunch of tools that are out there to help you get involved. But this is it. It's not a big deal. And this would go a long way to helping make more people happy about using your open source software, and something you should be doing anyway. Us in the Linux kernel, we've been doing this for over 20 years. We weren't doing the last one, but we are now. We've been doing that for the past year. The Linux kernel is averaging about 13 CVEs a day, which sounds like a lot, but we're actually less than the other operating systems out there. Again, CVEs are just an indication that a bug was fixed, pretty much. So you should be doing this already. Just add a security.txt file. You can become a CNA, which is a certificate or numbering authority, by issuing your own CVEs, and I strongly recommend that. I've given a whole talk about how to become a CNA. The Python Foundation, I'll call out, blazed the trail for all of us. They forced CVE.org to accept open source projects as a CNA. Before that, we couldn't be doing that. And now OpenSSF has published a whole document on how to do that. curl is now a CNA, Perl is a CNA. The Linux kernel is a CNA, Python, of course. There's a whole bunch of us as open source projects that are now CNAs. Kubernetes is one. CNCF has a number of other sub-projects that are CNAs. Zephyr is one. It's good. If you're an open source project, you should become a CNA. That means that nobody else can assign a security bug against you, a CVE against you, without you knowing about it, which is very important. And also that you are now the person who's responsible for publishing those. Very simple, very easy to do that. You can be as complicated as the Linux kernel, or we have tools that will churn out CVEs automatically, or you can just use a web form and create the CVE automatically on your own, hand tune. Doesn't matter. We have a whole bunch of tools for this. You should be doing this. Bestpractices.dev has been around for many, many years. All open source projects should be following those. You can get a little badge saying how good an open source project works for security issues. And then there's a really cool tool from the Free Software Foundation Europe called Reuse that you can just run on your code base, spits out a SBOM, and spits out here's all the way of the copyrights and the licenses in my tarball. Very good. It's not necessarily a security issue, but it's very good for SBOM, for people knowing what is in their system. So part of the CRA is products are going to have to publish an SBOM. So now the world is actually going to realize that open source software is in everything because everybody has to publish that information. Before that, we didn't know. Well, we kind of knew, but it's there. So Reuse tool, very good for you if you want to do this on your own. So that's all you got to do. You should be doing this today. Don't freak out. There's a good stewards checklist that goes through if you're an open source stewards that matches back to the CRA saying here's all the things you have to do that match things up. Again, it comes down to those two things, but there you can point your lawyers at it at your company and it'll show you the actual links within the CRA or how things worked. Again, the cybersecurity policy from OpenSSF has done a really, really good job here. And finally, let's look at the timeline. The CRA entered into force already last year. June of this next year, the governments will finally be ready, and the assessment bodies will be ready to actually have reports sent to them. Manufacturers of that same year in 2026 are going to have to start reporting things, and then us as open source stewards and developers don't have to have everything in place until 2027. So we have plenty of time to get those two things done. Add a security.txt file, have an email, and then start reporting your vulnerabilities. You got many, many years to get there. It's not going to be a big deal. There are going to be some standards published by the CRA group. Standards of use of these is voluntary. We're getting involved in the creation of these standards. Again, it's just going to be common sense. Here's a good way to do software development. Here's some good methodologies to follow. Here's a good way to judge risks and other issues and vulnerabilities in your product. It's not a big deal, but they're voluntary. The standards aren't finished yet. Some of the standards aren't going to be finished until after the CRA goes into full force, which is kind of funny to watch. Creating laws and standards takes time, but they will be there. But don't worry too much. Use of them is voluntary. Again, a whole bunch of links. You guys can look at the talk. There's a free training course, which is cool. The whole site, OpenSSF has done a bunch. ANISA themselves have put a whole bunch of documentation out there about how this deals with open source software and what to do about this. They've all provided a lot of really good stuff. And that's it. Thank you very much.